A man walks into the restaurant every Thursday at 11:30 p.m. No one knows his real name, no one dares ask. Only a 24-year-old waitress dares look him straight in the eye. Tonight, she calls him from the locker room floor, blood on her lips, her phone cracked. And when he hangs up, 7 black SUVs speed toward that restaurant. Which city are you watching in? Like and comment below to let me know how far this story has come. And stay until the end, because this is just the beginning. The rain that night came sideways. It didn't fall so much as a tack. Horizontal sheets of freezing water that found every gap in a coat collar, every crack in a window seal, every hollow place a person tried to keep warm. Chicago in February was not cruel the way people from warmer cities imagined cruelty. It wasn't dramatic. It was just relentless. It wore you down the same way bad marriages and unpaid debt wore you down. Not all at once, but in increments so small you only noticed when you were already broken. Ivy Mercer had been broken for a while now. She just hadn't stopped moving long enough to feel it. She pushed through the side door of Black Lantern Grill at 9:47 p.m., 14 minutes late for her shift, rain dripping from the brim of her hood onto the sticky rubber mat inside the employee entrance. The kitchen noise hit her immediately. The clash of pans, the hiss of the flat top, someone swearing in Spanish near the dishwashing station. The smell was grease and burnt onions and the particular sourness of a restaurant that had been cutting corners on its cleaning supplies for too long. She'd stopped noticing the smell months ago. That, she figured, was what survival did to you. It killed your senses one by one until you could live inside almost anything. She hung her wet coat on a hook that was technically Miguel's hook, but Miguel had quit 3 weeks ago and nobody had reassigned it. She smoothed her hair in the small mirror above the coat rack, a mirror so spotted and warped that it gave back a version of her face that looked slightly wrong, like a photograph of herself taken at the wrong angle. There was a faint greenish-yellow shadow under her left eye. Old bruise, mostly healed. She'd gotten good at foundation. She'd gotten good at a lot of things that women shouldn't have to get good at. "You're late." The voice came from behind her without turning around, which meant Curtis Vane had been waiting for her specifically. Ivy didn't flinch. She'd trained herself out of flinching. 14 minutes. The red line had a delay at, "I don't care about the train." Curtis stepped into her peripheral vision. He was a medium-sized man who somehow occupied too much space in every room he entered. Thick neck, hands that hung slightly too far from his body, eyes that did the thing eyes did when their owner had learned to use them as a threat before opening his mouth. He was 38 and looked 50 in bad lighting and 35 when he smiled, and the smile was the most dangerous version of him. "You're docked an hour." "That's not—" "It is, actually." He smiled then, just briefly. "And you're on 4 top section tonight." Caitlin called out. Caitlin called out because Caitlin was the 3rd server in 6 months to leave without 2 weeks' notice, and everyone in this building understood why, even if nobody said it out loud. 4 top section on a Friday-adjacent Thursday night meant 12 tables that seated 4, a kitchen running 40 minutes behind on every ticket, and a tip pool that Curtis would skim before it ever reached her envelope. Ivy said nothing. She tied her apron and walked onto the floor. The Black Lantern Grill occupied a strange geography, physically wedged between a condemned warehouse and the back fence of a parking structure that served the glass towers of the financial district 3 blocks east. At some point in its history, it had probably been a decent late-night spot. The bones of it still suggested ambition, exposed brick, high ceilings, pendant lights that had been stylish in a specific year and were now just old. But the ambition had curdled. The clientele at Black Lantern on a Thursday night was a rotating cast of financial workers drinking too late, construction crews finishing night shifts, a few regulars who came because they had nowhere else to go, and the occasional person who wandered in from the street because the neon sign still worked. She moved through the first hour on autopilot. Table 4 wanted their steaks more done than they'd ordered. Table 7 had a man who kept touching the small of her back when she reached past him to pour water, and the kitchen was fighting about something that involved a lot of noise but apparently not faster ticket times. By 11 o'clock, her feet hurt, and she'd consumed nothing since a granola bar at 4 p.m., and the tips so far were embarrassing. At 11:29, the front door opened. She didn't see it happen. She had her back to the entrance, clearing a table near the window, stacking plates with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it so many times the motion was automatic. But she felt it, or something adjacent to feeling, a change in the room's pressure, a slight recalibration of the noise level, as if the restaurant had collectively adjusted its volume by 2 or 3 decibels without deciding to. By the time she turned around, he was already seated in the back booth. Charcoal coat, dark enough that it absorbed the dim light rather than reflecting it. He'd hung it on the booth hook himself. He always did that. Never waited for anyone to take it. Beneath it he wore a black sweater, no tie, no visible jewelry except a watch on his left wrist that she'd never been close enough to examine properly. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, lean in the way that suggested discipline rather than deprivation, with the kind of stillness that most men had to spend decades acquiring and some never managed at all. His name on the receipts was Adrian Moretti. Ivy picked up her order pad and walked to the back booth with the same practiced neutral expression she brought to every table. It was different with him, though, and she knew it was different, and she disliked herself slightly for knowing it. The difference was not attraction exactly, or not only that, it was something stranger. Most of the men who came through this restaurant took up space aggressively. They arrived with noise and need and the low-grade assumption that the woman carrying their food existed primarily to satisfy one request at a time. Adrian Moretti sat in the back booth once a week and consumed approximately none of her energy. He never looked at her the way the man at table 7 looked at her. He never made a comment about her smile or asked her name like he was doing her a favor. He simply ordered coffee and steak, said thank you like he meant it, and left the booth cleaner than he found it. "The usual?" she asked. "Please." He didn't look up from something he was reading on his phone, then seemed to reconsider and put the phone face down on the table. "How's your night going?" 14 minutes behind in climbing. She wrote it down, though she didn't need to. "We're out of the mushroom side tonight." "That's fine." He paused. "You look tired." She looked up at that. Not because it was inappropriate. It wasn't, the way he said it. It was the way a doctor said it. Observational, without weight. But nobody in this building ever said anything to her that acknowledged her as a person rather than a function, and the normalcy of it caught her slightly off guard. "It's Thursday," she said. He almost smiled. Not quite. "Fair enough." She put his order in and moved back into the machinery of the night. But she noticed things, because she'd always been a noticer. It was useful in this job, and had been useful longer than this job. She noticed that when the kitchen manager, a heavy-set man named Darko, who owed Curtis money and was therefore permanently deferential, passed by the back section and caught a glimpse of the man in booth 14, he changed his walking trajectory by roughly 4 feet without appearing to do so consciously. She noticed that 2 men who'd been eating at the bar for the past 40 minutes and drinking very little both checked the front door the moment Adrian entered, and then returned to their food without speaking. She noticed that when she brought the coffee, there was a silence in the immediate vicinity of the booth that felt protected, like the eye of something. She'd been noticing these things for 3 months. She hadn't done anything with the information because the information didn't fit into the shape of any story she knew how to tell herself. She just filed it, the way she filed everything she didn't have room to process, in some internal drawer that was getting very full. The night worsened around 11:30. It started with a walk-in party of 8 who wanted a table immediately, which required Ivy to flip 2 four-tops and move a set of chairs that technically belonged in the storage hallway, which required her to walk past Curtis's office twice in 10 minutes, which was always a bad idea, and she knew it was a bad idea, and she did it anyway because there was no other route. The second pass, he called her name. Not loudly. That was the thing about Curtis. He rarely needed volume. He had a particular register, low and even, that functioned like a hand on the back of the neck. Ivy stopped moving. Her body did it before her mind agreed. "Come here." She had 17 things to do and a party of 8 waiting and a steak in the window that was going to be cold in 4 minutes. She walked into the office. The office was small and smelled like cigarette smoke that had been unsuccessfully replaced with a plug-in air freshener. Curtis was behind his desk with an open ledger in front of him, though he wasn't looking at the ledger. He was looking at her. "The till came up short $42 at the end of Renata's shift," he said. "Renata went home. You were in her section the last hour." Ivy felt the particular cold that had nothing to do with temperature. I wasn't near the register during her shift. I was in my own section. Darko says you went behind the bar at 10:15 to grab a lemon. To cut a garnish for table 9, that's $42. He tapped the desk once. Where is it? She looked at him steadily. She was 24 years old, and she had been looked at in offices by men with ledgers since she was 17 and working her first restaurant job in Pilsen. And the fear had not gone away, but she had learned to hold it in a place where it didn't show on her face. I don't have your $42. The smile came. Okay, just like that. It sat in the room like something waiting to become what it actually was. She left the office and went back to the floor and served the party of 8 and brought Adrian Moretti his steak and refilled his coffee and worked until 1 a.m. when the floor began to thin out. Around 1:15, she went to the locker room to get her phone, which she kept in her bag during shifts because Curtis had written a policy about personal devices, and she'd already been docked twice. Curtis was already in there. The locker room was a narrow corridor with metal lockers on both sides, a bench down the center, a single overhead light with a faintly buzzing fluorescent tube. He was standing near her locker, which was the one closest to the back wall, which meant she had to walk all the way in before she understood the geometry of the situation. The door was still open behind her. There was kitchen noise, the bass rumble of the ventilation system, someone's radio playing something with too much bass. Curtis? She kept her voice level. I need to get my phone. I know. He stepped sideways, not toward her, but positioning, like he was thinking about angles. I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. There's nothing to think about. I didn't take anything. See, the thing about working for someone is trust. He was closer now, close enough that she could smell the particular smell of him, cigarette smoke and something sweet, cologne or gum. And when trust breaks down, there are consequences. I need to get my phone and get back to the floor. He moved then, not slowly. His hand caught her by the shoulder first, spinning her, and then she was against the lockers. The metal edge caught her shoulder blade and sent pain shooting down her arm. She pushed back instinctively, and his fist caught the side of her face with enough force that her head snapped sideways and rang the metal behind it. The pain was immediate and specific and very bright, like a light turned on in a dark room. She slid down to the bench and then off it, and the floor was cold tile, and somewhere distant there was music from the kitchen radio, and her phone. Her phone was in the locker above her head, which was now very far away. Curtis said something. She didn't catch all of it. Her ears were ringing. The words "make up the difference" featured. The door opened and closed. Then there was just the fluorescent buzz and the cold floor and the particular silence of a room that had just had something terrible happen inside it. Ivy stayed on the floor for a moment. Just a moment. She allowed herself that, just the length of time required to assess the damage and locate herself in space. The right side of her face was pulsing. Her lip was cut, she could taste it. Her shoulder had taken the locker edge and would bruise badly by morning. She was conscious and her vision was clear and nothing felt broken, which meant this was survivable. She had survived versions of this before. Not from Curtis. Curtis had kept it to verbal and psychological for the 4 months she'd worked here, as if building towards something. But she'd grown up in a neighborhood where men who controlled things occasionally demonstrated that control physically. And she'd learned early that the most important thing was to stay functional, because functional meant you still had options. She pulled herself upright using the bench. She opened her locker. Her phone was inside. The screen cracked at one corner from where she'd dropped it a week ago, the battery at 31%. She sat on the bench and looked at it and thought about who she could call. The list was short. It had always been short. Her mother was in Rockford and didn't drive at night. Her friend Deja was 3 months into a new job with early mornings, and Ivy had already used up more favors than she could count. The police, she'd been in this city long enough to know what that call looked like at 2 a.m. for a woman in a restaurant locker room with no witnesses and a manager who would produce a ledger showing she was a theft suspect. She knew how those stories ended. She'd watched them end. She sat there for a full minute, maybe longer. The fluorescent tube buzzed. The kitchen radio continued its distant noise. Then she scrolled to a number she'd never used. She didn't know when she'd saved it. He must have left it on a receipt once, or maybe she'd copied it from the restaurant's customer contact system one night without deciding to, without admitting to herself why. The contact name in her phone said only AM, which was as much as she'd allowed herself. She called it before she could think about it any further. It rang twice. Yes. His voice was different on the phone than in person, more stripped down, if that was possible. Less ambient sound, more just the voice itself. It's Ivy. Her own voice came out steadier than she expected, and she hated the small flicker of pride she felt at that, because this was not a moment to feel anything except what was necessary. From the restaurant, a pause. I know who you are. Her throat tightened. She stopped, started again. I'm in the locker room. Something happened. I don't have anyone to call. Silence on the line. Not the silence of someone who hadn't heard her. A different kind. Focused. Can you come get me? She finally said. Her voice cracked on the last word just slightly. She let it. More silence. Then something in his voice changed, and it was the change that she remembered for a very long time afterward. It was like hearing a temperature drop. Everything warm in it simply withdrew, and what was left was something precise and very cold and entirely certain. Tell me who touched you. Ivy closed her eyes. In the dining room, 30 feet away and several locked doors removed from everything she'd just said, Adrian Moretti stood up from booth 14 for the first time in 4 months without finishing his coffee. He was already moving toward the exit. His phone was already at his ear calling a second number. The steak sat on the table, cut exactly once, abandoned. The back booth had never been left like that. The 2 men at the bar who had been eating carefully and drinking very little were watching the exit. One of them was already reaching for his own phone. Outside, the rain was still coming sideways. Ivy sat on the bench in the locker room and pressed the back of her hand against her split lip and listened to the cold quality of his voice on the phone, giving instructions to someone she couldn't hear. She didn't know what was being arranged. She didn't know what she had set in motion by making that call. She knew only that she was 24 years old and bleeding on a bench in a restaurant locker room in February in Chicago, and that the man she had called was coming, and that something was telling her, something quiet and persistent and slightly frightened, that once he walked through that door, the life she'd been surviving inside was going to end. She didn't know yet whether that was a good thing. The fluorescent tube buzzed. She tasted blood and waited. The door to the locker room opened without a knock. Ivy had heard the front entrance of the restaurant open and close twice in the preceding 7 minutes. She'd been counting sounds the way she always counted sounds when she was frightened, cataloging the world by noise because noise told you what was coming before your eyes could. First the front door, the particular seal-breaking sound of it, the cold draft that reached even back here. Then footsteps across the dining floor, not hurried, which was somehow worse than hurried. Then the inner corridor door. Then silence for approximately 4 seconds. Then her locker room door. Adrian Moretti stood in the frame and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. He was wearing the charcoal coat still, dusted with rain across the shoulders. His face was... She tried to read it and found she couldn't entirely. There was something controlled happening behind his eyes, something being held very deliberately in place the way you held a door shut against wind. He was looking at her face, specifically at the right side of it. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I'm already sitting, not lying down," she said. "I can stand." She stood. It cost her less than she expected, which meant the adrenaline was still doing something useful. She was aware of how she must look, lips swollen and split on the right side, the beginning of a bruise along her cheekbone that she could feel as heat and tightness, her uniform shirt untucked on one side from where she'd slid against the lockers. She didn't try to fix any of it. There was no version of this that looked better with adjustments. Adrian crossed the room in 4 steps. He reached up and very carefully in a way that seemed to require something from him, some specific internal decision, turned her face slightly toward the light with 2 fingers beneath her jaw. Not grabbing, just angling. She let him because the alternative was making a point that didn't feel worth making right now. He looked at the bruise. He looked at the cut lip. He looked at the redness around her throat, where Curtis's hand had been, which she hadn't mentioned on the phone because she hadn't thought to mention it because she was still cataloging damage in priority order and her throat hadn't cracked the top 3. His fingers dropped away from her jaw. Where is he? It was not a question in any meaningful sense. Adrian, where is Curtis Vane right now? She heard something in the way he said the name. Not heat, which would have been easier to manage. The absence of heat. The name delivered with the flat specificity of a coordinate. I don't know. He left. Maybe his office, maybe the floor. She paused. You can't. I'm not asking your permission. I know that. She looked at him straight. Her face hurt and her hands were slightly unsteady, but her voice was working and she used it. I know that. I'm asking you to listen to me for 30 seconds before you do anything, because whatever you do next affects me too, and you called me by name on the phone so you know I exist as a person and not just as the thing that happened in this room. Something moved across his face. Not quite surprise. Closer to recalibration. 30 seconds, he said. I don't want to be here when whatever happens next happens. I don't want to be a witness. I don't want to be a name in a report. I don't want to be a loose thread in whatever you're about to pull. She kept her eyes on his. I want to leave this building, and I want it to be because I chose to leave it, not because someone carried me out. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Okay. Okay meaning you walk out the front. My car is outside. You get in it. You don't look back. He paused. That's what you want? It wasn't exactly what she wanted. What she wanted was for this night not to have happened, for her face not to be throbbing, for her list of people to call in emergencies to be longer than one entry. But she was a practical woman, and she took what was available. Yes. Then go. She went. The dining floor was wrong the moment she stepped onto it. She felt it before she processed it, the quality of stillness in a space that should have had ambient noise. She kept her head down and moved toward the front, and it was only in her peripheral vision that she registered. The remaining customers were gone. Not in the way customers left when a restaurant was closing. Not with the gradual thinning and check requesting of a normal late night. Simply gone. Tables half cleared, 2 glasses still with liquid in them, a jacket over the back of a chair at table 3 that its owner had apparently left without. The front windows showed rain and the parking lot, and nothing else. The 2 men from the bar were standing near the front entrance. Not blocking it. Standing near it. They both looked at her, and one of them, older, thick through the chest, a face like a fist, held the door open without being asked. She walked through it. The air outside hit her face, and the cold was briefly enormous, and then just cold. A black SUV idled at the curb directly in front of the entrance, exhaust rising in the wet air. The rear door was already open. She looked at it for a moment, standing in the rain with her coat still on a hook inside and the cut on her lip beginning to sting seriously now that the warmth of indoors was gone. She got in. The interior smelled like leather and something faintly chemical, like cleaned metal. The heat was running. She sat and pulled the door shut and looked straight ahead through the rain-streaked windshield. The driver was a man she'd never seen, who did not turn around or introduce himself or say anything at all. There was a bottle of water in the cup holder nearest her. She opened it and drank half of it and pressed the cold plastic against the side of her face. Behind her, through the rear window, the lights of Black Lantern Grill burned in the rain. She did not look back. She had said she wouldn't. She looked back. The front door was closed. Nothing visible from outside, just the neon sign and the windows and the rain hitting all of it equally without interest. She faced forward again and pressed the water bottle harder against her cheek and waited. She was in that car for 23 minutes before Adrian appeared at the curb. She knew it was 23 minutes because she watched the clock on the dashboard with the attention of someone who had nothing else available to do. He came out through the front entrance, not hurrying, coat collar up against the rain. He opened the passenger door, the front passenger door, not the rear, and got in, and the driver pulled away from the curb before the door was fully closed. Ivy watched his profile. He was looking out the windshield. His hands were in his lap. She couldn't see any blood on him, which meant either nothing had happened in the way she'd been imagining, or he was very good at not carrying evidence. She didn't ask. She sat in the back seat of a stranger's car at 2 a.m. with a bruised face and the beginning of what she recognized as shock. Not the medical crisis kind, the quiet kind, where your body finishes processing the immediate danger and begins the longer work of understanding what just occurred. And she did not ask. 20 minutes later, the car stopped in front of a building she didn't recognize. Downtown adjacent, a residential tower with a doorman visible through the lobby glass. Adrienne got out and opened her door and held it, and she got out because she didn't have a better option, and because her apartment was across town and she had no coat and no plan, and her face was the wrong shape. The doorman didn't react to any of it. The apartment was on the 14th floor. It was large and mostly dark when they entered, and Adrienne turned on a single lamp in what appeared to be a living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. Ivy stood in the middle of the room and looked at the windows because looking at the windows was neutral. The city was spread out in the rain below, orange and white and smeared by water. "Sit down," Adrienne said from somewhere behind her. "I'm okay standing." "I know. Sit down anyway." She sat on the couch, which was leather and gray and the kind of furniture that cost more than her monthly rent. Adrienne came around in front of her with a first aid kit that was significantly more comprehensive than anything available in a residential apartment under normal circumstances. He sat on the coffee table across from her and opened it without theater. "I can do that myself," she said. "You can. Let me." She watched him clean the cut on her lip with the careful attention of someone who had done this before. Not to others, necessarily, but to himself. There was a scar along his left jaw she'd never been close enough to see properly, and now that she was close enough, she noticed it was old and well-healed and had been stitched by someone who knew what they were doing. She noticed his hands were steady. She noticed there was, in fact, no blood on them, or on his coat, and she filed that without opening the question. "What happened in there?" she said. "After I left?" "Nothing that concerns you." "Curtis Vane concerns me. He's my manager." "He's not your manager anymore." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" He met her eyes. "It means you're not going back to that building. You don't get to—" She stopped, recalibrated. "You don't get to decide that." "I'm not deciding it. I'm telling you what's already true." He held a piece of gauze against her lip with 2 fingers, gentle, impersonal as a medic. "Curtis Vane has outstanding warrants in 2 states. By morning, there will be people who want to discuss that with him. He won't be difficult to find." A pause. "Or he won't be findable at all, depending on certain choices he makes tonight." The room was very quiet, rain against the windows, the lamp throwing warm light over the gray furniture and his face and her hands in her lap. "Who are you?" she said. It came out flat. Not dramatically, just the question, because she realized she'd been carrying it for 3 months, and this seemed like the only moment it was appropriate to put it down. Adrienne looked at her with an expression she couldn't name. Not evasive, not performing, just measuring something. Measuring whether she actually wanted the answer, or whether she wanted the version of him that she'd been constructing across 14 Thursday nights. "You know who I am," he said quietly. "I know a name on receipts. Ivy. Tell me who you are." Her voice was steady. She was proud of it and slightly irritated at herself for being proud of it. He sat back. He folded his hands on his knee and looked at the window. The rain ran down the glass in uneven lines. "The Moretti Syndicate. You've heard of it." She had. Everyone in Chicago had, in the way everyone in Chicago had heard of weather patterns and infrastructure problems. Abstractly, as a feature of the city rather than a specific thing with edges and weight and a man sitting across from them on a coffee table. The syndicate ran through the Midwest the way certain rivers ran through certain cities. You built around it, you pretended it wasn't there, you made your peace with the fact that the water had always been running beneath the street and would be running there long after you were gone. "You run it," she said. "I run it." She processed that for a moment. The lamp hummed faintly. "How long?" "Since I was 26. Before that, for my father, since I was 17. He said it without pride or apology, like a man listing credentials for a job he'd held so long he no longer thought about the listing. "I didn't choose it as a career path. It chose me the way those things choose people. Poverty, geography, the particular sequence of events that constitutes a childhood in a specific kind of neighborhood. That's a justification. It's a fact. There's a difference." He looked at her. You grew up in Pilsen. She went still. How do you know that? I know a great deal about the people who work in places I frequent regularly. He said it without apology. I know your name is Ivy Rosalind Mercer. You're 24. You've worked at Black Lantern for 4 months. Before that, 2 years at a restaurant in Wicker Park. Before that, a diner in Pilsen where you started at 16. I know your father's name was Robert Mercer and that he died when you were 19. He paused. I know how he died. The silence in the room changed texture. Then you know why I'm sitting here trying to figure out if I should be afraid of you, she said. Her voice came out thinner than she wanted it to. Yes. Her father had died owing money to people who were not exactly like the people Adrian Moretti commanded, but were not entirely different either. Debt collectors who made their arguments physically. She had been 19 years old, and she had identified her father at a county facility, and then she had gone home and stood in the kitchen of their apartment in Pilsen for a long time without turning the lights on. And then she had decided, with the hard, practical clarity that grief sometimes produced in certain people, that she would never be in debt to anyone. And she would never put herself in a position where someone with power over her could end a conversation the way that conversation had been ended. And here she was at 24, sitting on a leather couch in the apartment of a man who ran the most powerful criminal organization in the Midwest, with a bruised face and a split lip because she had called him. I should go, she said. It's almost 3 a.m. You have no coat, and your face needs another hour with ice. Adrian, I'm not keeping you here. He stood from the coffee table. He was taller than he seemed seated, which she already knew, but the room reminded her. I'm telling you it's 3 in the morning, and you have a concussion risk, and I have 4 guest rooms. In the morning, you can go wherever you want. I will arrange transport, and you will never have to see this apartment or me again if that's what you decide. She looked at him. And if it's not what I decide, she said. He looked back. Something in the controlled space behind his eyes shifted, just slightly. Then that's a different conversation. She slept in a guest room that was larger than her living room and had blackout curtains so effective that when she woke, it could have been any hour. It was 9:17 a.m. Her face hurt with the specific declarative ache of settled bruising. She lay in the bed for 3 minutes in the careful stillness of someone taking inventory. Body, situation, available exits, and then she got up. He was in the kitchen. Coffee made, 2 cups, 1 already poured. He was standing at the kitchen window with his own cup looking out at the gray morning river with the aspect of a man who had not slept or had slept very briefly and was now simply occupying the morning because it was there and required occupying. He was wearing different clothes, dark pants, a gray shirt, same quality as everything else he wore, which was to say significant and unpretentious simultaneously. He heard her and turned. He looked at her face in the morning light without disguising that he was looking. Better or worse? She asked. Worse looking, which means the swelling is out. Better. She sat at the kitchen island. He poured coffee and pushed it toward her without asking. She drank it black because she'd run out of the habit of adding things to coffee somewhere in the second year of restaurant work, when you consumed it purely as fuel. I want to know about the trafficking, she said. He went very still. Darko said something 3 weeks ago, she continued, to one of the line cooks in the back hallway. I wasn't supposed to hear it. He said Curtis was moving more than staff through that restaurant. She wrapped her hands around the mug. I didn't know what to do with it. Adrian set his own cup down on the counter. The stillness in him had shifted quality. It was no longer the managed stillness of a man in a room with a woman he was being careful around. It was something older and colder. What exactly did you hear? He said. Darko said, and this is close to exact, I remember it because it stuck. He said, Curtis isn't careful enough, and when the Gray Line shipment comes through next week, it's going to bring attention. And the cook said, not our problem, and walked away. She looked at him. What is the Gray Line shipment? Where did you hear that word? I just told you where. He turned away from her. He put both hands flat on the counter and stood with his back to her and breathed. Just breathed, slowly, for approximately 5 seconds. Then he turned back, and his face was the face she recognized from the restaurant, the controlled one, except now she'd seen enough of him to read the control itself as information. The Gray Line Network, he said, is the trafficking operation that has been running through downtown Chicago restaurant supply chains for 11 years. Curtis Vane's restaurant is one of 6 transit points. He paused. I've been trying to dismantle it for 14 months. Why you? The question landed in the room and stayed there. He looked at her for a long time. My sister, he said finally. Her name was Carla. She was 22. He stopped, started again. She was taken through a network structured exactly like this one, 11 years ago. He picked up his coffee cup and then put it down again without drinking. I found out about it too late. I've been finding out about things too late her entire life, and then afterward, and I have been... He stopped again. Ivy sat with that. The shipment Darko mentioned, she said, is in 4 days. He looked at her. Which means you heard that conversation 3 weeks ago, and you've been carrying it alone since then. I didn't know who to tell. You called me last night. That was different. Yes, he said. It was. They looked at each other across the kitchen island. Outside, the river moved gray and heavy in the winter morning. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. The city made its city sounds, traffic and distance, the low percussion of a million people beginning their day in a place that required toughness to survive. I'm going to ask you something, Adrian said, and I need you to hear it without the answer you think you're supposed to give. She waited. Someone inside my organization, he said, has been obstructing this investigation for 8 months, feeding information back to the Gray Line operators. I don't know who. He paused. Until 3 weeks ago, fewer than 6 people knew the details of the counter-operation I've been running. Since then, 2 of those 6 have behaved in ways that suggest they know more than they should about my movements. Ivy understood with the specific understanding of someone who had grown up watching how power worked from the ground level, exactly what he was telling her. You're saying the leak is close to you. I'm saying that a woman who works as a waitress in one of the transit point restaurants, who has been present for Thursday meetings for 3 months, who is not connected to my organization, and therefore not visible to whoever is watching my organization. He stopped. The sentence finished itself. She stood up. No. Ivy? No. I heard you. I heard all of it. My father died because he got close to people like you, and he owed them something, and they collected it. She pushed back from the island. I'm not an asset. I'm not a resource. I'm not something you use because I'm invisible. That's not... Then what is it? It's me telling you the truth. His voice was flat and direct, and she could hear in it the effort of someone saying something they usually didn't say. Because you asked me last night who I was and I told you. Because you're already in this whether you chose to be or not. You heard the word Gray Line, and Darko knows you were in that hallway. And if the person inside my organization finds out you talked to me this morning, invisible stops being something you are. He paused. I am telling you the truth so that you can make a real choice, not so that I can use you. The kitchen was quiet. Ivy stood with her hands at her sides and her bruised face tight in the morning light and thought about her father, about what it meant to be chosen by proximity to dangerous things, about how the choice to stay out of something was not always a choice that remained available. I need to think, she said. Yes? I need my coat from the restaurant. I'll have it brought. And I need... She stopped. Something was happening outside. She heard it before she saw it. A change in the low noise of the building, a different frequency in the elevator mechanism. Adrian heard it too. His posture changed in a way that was very small and very complete, like a different person stepped into the same body. His phone lit up on the counter. He looked at it. The controlled expression held for exactly 2 seconds, and then something beneath it cracked. What? Ivy said. He looked up at her. Luca knows you're here. The name meant nothing to her. His face told her it should. Who is Luca? She said, already moving without knowing why, already reading the room for... Who is Luca? She said, already moving without knowing why, already reading the room for exits the way her body had apparently decided to do independently of her conscious mind. Adrian was already moving too. He crossed to the kitchen counter and pulled open the second drawer, not the utensil drawer, the one below it, and removed a handgun with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone retrieving a set of keys. He checked it without looking at it, by feel, and put it at his back beneath the gray shirt. All of this took approximately 4 seconds. "Luca Severin," he said, "is my second in command." He was already walking toward the hallway, phone at his ear. "He's been with me 11 years. He knows this building." "That's not an answer to my question." "It's the only answer that matters right now." He spoke into the phone. "Where is he?" A pause. "How many?" Another pause. Longer. His jaw tightened. "Get Reyes to the 14th floor. Now." He ended the call and looked at her. "Stay close to me and don't argue with anything I tell you to do in the next 10 minutes. I'm not one of your... Ivy." He said her name once, flat, and looked at her with the specific focus of someone who needed her to understand something quickly. "I have people in this building who are not mine. That sentence means something. Do you understand what it means?" She understood what it meant. "Yes." "Then stay close." The elevator was already descending when Adrian checked the panel in the hallway, not coming up to them but going down, which he appeared to read as information. He made a decision she could see but not follow, turned left instead of right, took her through a door marked stairs that was heavier than a residential stair door had any reason to be. Reinforced, she realized. Reinforced and alarmed and currently disarmed because someone with a code had done it recently from the inside. He stopped on the landing, looked down the stairwell, listened. She listened too. Footsteps, below them, not hurrying, which was the thing that made her skin pull tight. People in a hurry made noise. People who were trained moved like Adrian moved, with economy, with the specific quiet of someone who had learned that sound was information given to enemies. 2 floors below. Maybe 3. Adrian reversed direction and went up. The roof access door opened to gray morning sky and cold that hit like a wall after the heated interior. The city spread in every direction, flat and enormous and indifferent. A water tower to the east, HVAC units humming in rows, the river a dark ribbon 15 blocks west. Adrian moved along the rooftop with a certainty that told her he'd thought about this before, had probably walked this specific route in his head at some point because he was the kind of man who thought about routes. His phone buzzed. He read it walking. "Reyes is 2 minutes out." "Who is Reyes?" "Someone I trust." "Like you trusted Luca?" He stopped walking. Just briefly, 1 stride's worth. Then continued. "That's fair," he said. "Keep moving." The adjacent building's rooftop was 4 feet lower and separated by a gap of perhaps 5 feet, a gap that existed as a legal boundary between properties and a practical problem for anyone who wasn't committed. Adrian went over it without hesitating, dropped cleanly to the lower roof, turned and looked at her. Ivy looked at the gap. 4 feet of air above a 14-story drop to an alley. She had grown up in Pilsen, and she had done stupid things as a teenager because her neighborhood required a certain relationship with calculated risk, but she was 24 years old and her face hurt, and the coffee she'd drunk 20 minutes ago was the first thing in her stomach since a granola bar 18 hours ago. She jumped. He caught her arm on the landing, steadied her, let go. "Other side," he said, "door on the left." "You've done this before." "Made this specific crossing? No." A pause that might have contained something like dark amusement. "Broadly speaking, yes." The door on the left took them into a different building entirely. Older, residential, the hallway smelling of cooking and carpet cleaner, someone's television audible behind a door on the 2nd floor. They went down 3 flights and out through a side exit that deposited them on a street Ivy didn't immediately recognize, narrow, parallel to the main avenue. A black car, different from last night's, smaller, was idling at the end of the block. The driver was a woman, late 30s, dark hair pulled back, who looked at Adrian when he got in the passenger seat with an expression that communicated significant information in a very short time. "Talk," Adrian said. Reyes pulled into traffic before she spoke. "Luca called a meeting at Crane Street at 6 this morning. Your inner 6. Except you, and except me, because nobody called me, which means I wasn't supposed to know about it." She glanced in the rearview mirror at Ivy with an expression that was not hostile, but was conducting an assessment. "The meeting ran 40 minutes. Afterward, Tomas..." She stopped. "Tomas called me. He didn't say what was discussed, but he said, "I should know you had a guest at the Riverside unit and that the guest was a complication." The car was quiet except for the sound of the city outside. Ivy watched Adrian's profile. He was looking through the windshield. His hands were in his lap, still, and she had begun to understand that stillness as a specific state, not calm, not passive. The stillness of something with a great deal of force in it that had not yet decided on a direction. "How long has Tomas been talking to Luca?" he said. Reyes was quiet for 2 seconds. "I don't know." "Estimate." "If I had to..." She stopped at a light. 8 months, maybe 10. The Halverson thing last spring went wrong in a way that required specific knowledge. I thought it was a mistake. I didn't... She stopped again. "I didn't say anything." "Why?" "Because Luca is your second. Because accusing your second of feeding information out is not a thing you do without evidence. And I didn't have evidence, and I didn't want to be wrong." She paused. "I was wrong to not say anything. I know that." "Yes." He said it without drama. Just yes. Ivy leaned forward slightly from the back seat. "What is the Gray Line shipment?" Reyes glanced in the mirror. Adrian said, "Answer her." Reyes drove for a moment. Gray Line is a transit operation. Human cargo moving through restaurant supply chains, refrigerated trucks, food distribution routes, municipal inspection blind spots. 6 restaurants in Chicago serve as waypoints. Black Lantern Grill is the northern hub. She paused. It's been running for 11 years under protection from city officials and 2 federal contacts who've been managing which investigations get assigned to which investigators. 4 days, Ivy said. There's a shipment scheduled for Thursday. It's the largest one in 3 years. Luca has been building toward it. Reyes said it without emotion, the way someone delivered information they had processed far enough past that the emotional content had been filed separately. 14 individuals and ages unknown. Ivy sat back. The city moved past the windows. Storefronts, pedestrians. A school bus stopped at a corner. All of it entirely ordinary and entirely indifferent. Luca has been running it, Ivy said. Not Curtis Vane. Curtis Vane is a mid-level manager in every sense of the word, Reyes said. He runs the restaurant Waypoint, handles the physical transit, takes his fee. He doesn't know the scope. He doesn't know who's above him. She paused. Luca Severin built the protection structure on the institutional side. He has the city contacts. He controls who gets paid and who gets exposed. Another pause. He's also been telling the Gray Line operators for 8 months that Adrian was close to dismantling their network, which kept them from shutting down and moving the operation out of reach. Why? Ivy said. Why would he? Because dismantling Gray Line was Adrian's operation, Reyes said flatly. Not Luca's. And Luca has been second for 11 years. If Adrian successfully collapses a trafficking network that federal agencies have failed to touch, he becomes untouchable, which means Luca never moves up. She glanced at Adrian. Which is what I think. I could be wrong about the motive. You're not wrong, Adrian said. He said it with the weight of someone who has just confirmed something they had been refusing to confirm for a long time. I've known for 6 weeks. I didn't have hard evidence. 6 weeks, Reyes said, carefully. Yes. The car was quiet. Ivy thought about the shape of what she was hearing. A man who had been building something to honor his dead sister, a second-in-command who had been selling that effort back to the people it was meant to destroy. 8 months of obstruction that had kept 14 people in a pipeline that ended somewhere Ivy did not let herself imagine fully. 6 weeks of Adrian knowing and saying nothing. She thought about what it cost a person to know something that large and carry it alone. She thought about her father, about the particular way that proximity to powerful men's business arrangements destroyed ordinary people who never made the choice to be proximate in the first place. Where are we going? She said. Safe house, Reyes said. Lakeview. I need to make a stop first, Adrian said. Reyes looked at him. Adrian, Crane Street. I need to see it myself. That is I know what it is. His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. Crane Street. 10 minutes. Reyes drove to Crane Street. The Crane Street facility was a converted warehouse in the near west side that functioned as far as the city was concerned, a catering supply company. Large refrigerated loading dock, fleet of white vans, all the right permits. Ivy had passed facilities like it 100 times in her life and seen them as background infrastructure, the ordinary industrial texture of a city. She looked at it differently now. The loading dock was active even at this hour. A van was backed up to the dock door, two men moving crates. Ordinary in every visible detail. Adrian looked at it from the car for approximately 30 seconds. His face was doing the controlled thing, but his jaw was very tight, and there was something in his eyes that she recognized as grief wearing the clothing of rage, because rage was more functional. "I built this network to find it," he said, mostly to himself. "I put pieces in place for 3 years. The restaurant placement, the supply chain access, the city contact relationships. I built it to find this and pull it apart from the inside." He paused. "And Luca used the same architecture I built for that purpose to run it instead." Ivy said nothing for a moment. Then, "What does he want now, Luca? What does he want from this morning?" Adrian looked at her. "He wants me to know he's in control of the situation. The meeting, having Tomas call Reyes, knowing where you were." He paused. "It's a message. He's telling me he has the structure and I'm exposed. He's giving me a choice." "What choice?" "Step back. Let Thursday happen. Keep a percentage of an operation I spent 3 years trying to destroy." His voice was flat and specific. "Or don't, and find out how exposed I actually am." "He's not going to let Thursday just happen," Reyes said from the front. 14 individuals means maximum attention if it goes wrong. He needs you either cooperative or gone before Thursday." "I know," Adrian said. "So the window is 4 days." 3, realistically. Ivy looked at the loading dock. The two men with the crates had finished. The van door closed. Ordinary, ordinary, ordinary. "What happens to the people on Thursday if you don't stop the shipment?" Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. She thought about Carla, a 22-year-old woman she'd never met 11 years ago who had been moved through a system like this one before her brother could find her. She thought about what it meant to build an empire out of that kind of grief, and whether the empire was the right response to the grief, and whether any of that mattered anymore, given what was in front of them. "I'll help you," she said. Adrian turned to look at her. "Not because I've decided you're a good person," she said. "Not because last night changed my mind about any of the things that are actually true about who you are and what you run. Because there are 14 people in that pipeline, and I know what that word means now, and I cannot unknow it." She met his eyes. "Tell me what you need." He held her gaze for a long moment. The gray city moved outside the car windows. "I need to get inside Luca's communication structure," he said. "He uses an intermediary, a city official named Brennan who handles the federal contact management. Brennan has been careful for 10 years. He communicates through a legitimate business front, a consulting firm in the loop. In person only, with the exception of one standing Thursday lunch meeting at a restaurant called Sable." He paused. "Luca doesn't go himself. He never has. He sends a contact." Ivy understood. "A restaurant," she said. "A restaurant. You need someone he doesn't know. I need someone he's never seen in any context connected to me. Someone who can get close enough in a public setting to—" He stopped. "There is a phone. Brennan carries it. A second phone, not his registered device. It contains the communication thread between him and Luca's intermediary for the past 2 years. If I have that phone for 40 minutes, I have everything. Every name, every payment, every federal contact. The whole protection structure." He paused. "But I cannot send anyone from my network because Luca will have eyes on Brennan's meetings between now and Thursday." "What does Brennan look like?" "Ivy, what does he look like?" Adrian looked at her for a long time. Something moved across his face that was not quite the controlled expression and not quite anything else. Something raw, briefly visible, then managed back into the familiar stillness. 61. Gray hair. He always sits with his back to the wall. She nodded. "I know how to read a room. This is not—" "I've been serving people in restaurants since I was 16, she said. I know how to be invisible, and I know how to be present. And I know the difference between a man who's watching for threats and a man who's watching for waitstaff. And those are two different kinds of looking, and I know how to move inside both of them. She paused. You need someone he's never seen. You said it yourself. The car was quiet. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past on Crane Street, close enough to rock the vehicle slightly. One of the ordinary machines of the ordinary world going about its business over the top of everything that was happening beneath it. Reyes spoke from the front seat, her voice neutral. She's not wrong about the access problem. I know she's not wrong, Adrian said. You know what happens if Luca finds out she went near Brennan. I know what happens. Then you know she can't do it without... I know. He cut her off. He looked at Ivy. His jaw worked once. If Luca finds out you're involved in this, he will use you, specifically, deliberately, as a pressure point. He already knows you exist and that you matter to me. He said that last part without any particular inflection, but it landed in the car with weight. That is a level of danger that I am not... He stopped. That I am asking you to fully understand before you agree to anything. Ivy thought about her father again. About being 24 years old and already knowing that the exits from certain situations closed faster than you expected. About the fact that she had called this man from a locker room floor, not because she had a plan, but because she had run out of other options, and that the situation had not actually changed structurally since then. I understand, she said. Ivy, Adrian. She said his name the way he'd said hers earlier. Flat, direct, meaning stop talking and listen. I understand. I'm still saying yes. He held her gaze. Then he looked away, out the window, at the loading dock where nothing was moving anymore. His hands in his lap were still. Thursday lunch, he said. Sable Restaurant, 12:30. I'll need to know everything about Brennan, what he eats, how he sits, where the phone is, how long I have. Reyes will brief you. Reyes glanced back in the mirror. Her expression was not warm, but it was something adjacent to respect. I'll need the morning. You have it, Ivy said. The car pulled away from Crane Street. The catering warehouse shrank in the rear window, white and ordinary and enormous in its ordinariness. And Ivy watched it until it was gone and then faced forward and kept her hand steady in her lap through an act of will she was not sure she had enough of and went ahead and used it anyway. They reached the Lakeview Safe House at 9:50 a.m. It was a narrow 3-flat on a residential street, brown brick, nothing to distinguish it from 8,000 other buildings in this city. Reyes parked and they went in through the back, through a kitchen that smelled like old coffee and was clean in the specific way of a space used functionally rather than lived in. The briefing took 4 hours. By 2 in the afternoon, Ivy knew Brennan's full name was Gerald Brennan, Deputy Director of a municipal oversight department that existed partly to obscure its own function. He had been taking Luca's payments through a legal consulting arrangement for 9 years. He lunched at Sable every Thursday between 12:30 and 2, the same table, back left corner, water with lemon. He always ordered the same thing, and had for a decade. He was a creature of rigid habit, which was why he'd survived this long, because rigid habit created predictability, which created the illusion of control. The secondary phone was kept in the inside breast pocket of his jacket, left side. He removed it during lunch only once, usually around the 1-hour mark, to check messages. She would need to be within arm's reach at the 1-hour mark. She would need a reason to be within arm's reach that looked like nothing. Reyes walked her through it 3 times. Adrian sat across the table for the first 2 and then stood and moved to the window and stood there looking out for the third. And Ivy noticed that when she got a detail right, Reyes nodded once, and when she got a detail wrong, Reyes said so without softening it, and she filed the corrections and got them right the next time. By the time the briefing ended, the afternoon light was going gray through the kitchen window, and Ivy's head hurt with the specific ache of concentrated information intake on top of a night with 3 hours of sleep and a bruised face. Adrian brought her water and sat across from her. Reyes had stepped into another room. You don't have to do this tomorrow, he said. Thursday is tomorrow, she said. If not tomorrow, when? I can find another way. Can you? He didn't answer. I grew up watching powerful men make decisions that affected everyone around them and consulting no one, she said. I'm not interested in being something that happens to me. I'd rather make a choice that I can at least say I made. She drank the water. Even if it goes wrong. If it goes wrong. I know what happens if it goes wrong. She set the glass down. You told me. He looked at her. In the gray afternoon light, with the controlled expression worn thin from a day of things that required it, he looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before. Not the tiredness of a sleepless night, but of something longer, something structural. I've been doing this for 18 years, he said. I'm not a person you should emulate or admire or consider an example of anything good. I know. I have hurt a lot of people. I know that too. Then, Adrian, she said it quietly. I know all of that. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm not. She stopped, chose words carefully. I'm not confusing what you are with how you've treated me. Those are two different things, and I can hold both of them. She paused. I'm just asking you to let me make this choice without you talking me out of it. He was quiet for a long time. Okay, he said. Okay. Outside, the afternoon was going dark the way Chicago afternoons went dark in February. Not gradually, but decisively, like a decision made and executed quickly. The streetlights were coming on. The ordinary world was running its ordinary evening. Ivy sat in a safe house kitchen in Lakeview and thought about what she had agreed to and felt, beneath the fear, something that surprised her. Not confidence, not certainty. Something smaller and more honest than either of those. Something that felt like finally being in motion. Her phone, cracked screen, 30% battery, buzzed on the table. Unknown number. She looked at it. She looked at Adrian. He was already looking at the phone. She answered it. The voice on the other end was measured and pleasant, the voice of a man who had learned to make pleasantness function as a weapon. Ivy Mercer, it said. My name is Luca Severin. I think it's past time we had a conversation. Don't you? The kitchen went very still. Ivy held the phone against her ear and did not move and did not look at Adrian and focused entirely on the voice, because the voice was information, and information was the only thing she had right now that constituted an advantage. I'm listening, she said. Good. Luca Severin had the voice of a man who managed restaurants or ran nonprofit boards, cultured, at ease, carrying the specific warmth of someone who had spent years learning to make people feel included in something before he used them. I want you to understand that I have no interest in harming you. That's not a threat in reverse. It's a statement of genuine preference. You're a waitress from Pilsen who got caught in the geography of someone else's war. That's not your fault. Okay, Ivy said. I also want you to understand that the man sitting near you right now, and he is near you, I know he is, has made choices in the last 18 hours that have significantly narrowed his options. Not yours, his. A pause. The particular pause of someone allowing information to settle. You still have options, Ivy. That's the point of this call. Adrian was watching her face. He was reading the conversation from her expressions. She could see him doing it, and she kept her face as neutral as she could manage, which was not entirely neutral because her heart was doing something loud and insistent behind her sternum that she was working to keep out of her breathing. What kind of options? She said. The uncomplicated kind. You leave the address you're currently at. You take a car. I'll have one outside in 8 minutes, and you go wherever you want to go. Your apartment, another city, it doesn't matter to me. In exchange, you don't involve yourself further in whatever Adrian has decided to do about Thursday. Another pause. That's the whole arrangement. You walk away, you stay walked away, and this time next week you're having coffee in your own kitchen, and none of this ever touched you. Ivy looked at the table, at her cracked phone screen, at the water glass Adrian had brought her, still half full. And if I don't, then you become part of the problem I'm solving, and the solutions I apply to problems are not gentle. His voice didn't change register when he said it. That was what made it land the way it did. Not the words, but the absolute evenness of delivery. 8 minutes. Think about it. The line went dead. She put the phone on the table. She looked at Adrian. He was already moving, already pulling his own phone out, already at the window looking down at the street with the focused scan of a man assessing a perimeter. He has someone on this building, Adrian said. It was not a question. He said 8 minutes for a car. Ivy stood, which means he already knows the address. Tomas. Adrian said the name with a flatness that contained a significant amount of something that wasn't flatness. He pulled back from the window. Tomas gave him this location. Reyes appeared in the kitchen doorway. She'd heard enough. Her face was doing the thing faces did when a person was running calculations faster than they could speak them. How long do we have? Less than 8 minutes. He'll have someone moving already. The car is cover. Adrian looked at Reyes. Back exit. Your car is still in the alley? Yes. Then we move now. He looked at Ivy. Can you move? I've been moving this whole conversation, she said. She picked up her phone. Let's go. They went out through the back the same way they'd come in, through the kitchen and down the rear stairwell, and Ivy counted the flights because counting things was the mechanism she used to keep her brain organized when her body was doing frightening things. 3 flights. Door to the alley. Cold air, garbage smell, the narrow concrete corridor between the building and the back fence. Reyes's car where she'd left it, undisturbed. They were pulling out of the alley when a black sedan turned onto the street from the north end. Reyes went south without accelerating sharply enough to communicate urgency. The sedan passed them going the other direction. Through the window, in the gray afternoon light, Ivy caught a glimpse of the passenger. Young, watchful, the specific quality of stillness she recognized now. That's one, Reyes said. There'll be another at the south end, Adrian said. Turn east. Reyes turned east. Where are we going? Ivy said. I'm working on that, Adrian said, which was not an answer, but was at least honest. They drove in silence for 6 blocks while Adrian made 2 phone calls in rapid succession, both brief, both in a register too low for her to catch from the back seat. After the second call, he put the phone down and sat for a moment with his hands on his knees, and Ivy watched his profile in the passing streetlight and saw him making a decision. She could actually see it. The specific stillness that preceded resolution, the way his jaw set, the single slow exhale. Sable, he said. Reyes looked at him. That's tomorrow. It was tomorrow. He looked at her. Brennan is at Sable every Thursday. He's there now. It's 12 minutes away. Adrian, she hasn't had the full... I know. He turned to look at Ivy in the back seat. Brennan has the Thursday lunch every week, not just the standing meeting with Luca's contact. He arrives at 12:30. He stays 2 hours. He's been there since 12:30, which means he's 40 minutes into lunch right now. He paused. Luca just called you, which means Luca is managing 2 things simultaneously, containing you and managing Thursday. He's distracted in a way he won't be again. Ivy processed this. You want to move now. Luca expects you to run or capitulate. He doesn't expect you to walk into a restaurant and sit down next to his city contact in the next 20 minutes. He held her gaze. But I need you to understand, this is not the planned approach. Reyes hasn't finished the briefing. You'll be going in with 40% of the information you were supposed to have. What's the 60% I'm missing? Brennan has a personal security detail. 1 man, plain clothes, always sits 2 tables away. Reyes was going to show you photographs this evening. Description. Reyes spoke from the front without hesitating. 50-something, heavy set. He always orders soup. Gray jacket today, I'd estimate. He rotates 3 coats, it's Thursday. Gray jacket. Table placement. Brennan back left corner. Security 2 tables northeast, direct sight line. The phone. Inside breast pocket, left side. He checks it around the 1 hour mark. You need to be at his table or passing it at the 60-minute mark, which is, Reyes checked the clock on the dash. 1:29. We have 14 minutes. Ivy looked at her own reflection in the dark window. Bruised face, no coat, the same clothes she'd been in since last night's shift. She looked like what she was. A woman who'd been through something. She filed that. It was either a liability or it wasn't, and she would find out which. I need a coat, she said, and something to carry, a bag, a notebook, anything that gives me a reason to dig through it while I'm standing near someone. Reyes reached behind the passenger seat without looking and produced a dark wool coat that was her size within one size and a leather notebook that had seen significant use. "I keep a go bag in the car," she said, without elaborating on why. Ivy put the coat on. The bruise on her face was not concealable without foundation she didn't have, but she thought about it and decided it was actually useful. A woman with a bruised face in a nice restaurant was invisible in a specific way, the way anything uncomfortable was invisible to people who preferred not to see it. "What's my cover?" she said. "You're meeting someone who canceled," Reyes said. "You get the table anyway. You're waiting to see if they show. You've been crying. The face explains the face. You order wine you don't drink. You're the kind of woman in the middle of something personal who is very visibly not looking at anyone else in the room, which means everyone feels comfortable not looking at you." Ivy thought about it. It was good. "The phone," she said. "Once I have it, where do I take it?" "You don't take it," Adrian said. "You can't walk out with it. If it goes missing, Brennan notices before we can use it. There's a device." He reached into his coat and produced something small, a flat, rectangular piece of hardware roughly the size and thickness of a credit card. "You get close enough, you hold this against his jacket near the pocket, you press the single button on the left edge. It copies everything on the phone wirelessly in under 60 seconds. He doesn't need to take it out. You don't need to touch the phone." He paused. 60 seconds. While I'm standing next to him. While you're standing next to him. She took the device. It was lighter than she expected. She put it in the coat's inner pocket, left side, mirroring where Brennan kept his. 60 seconds is a long time to have a reason to stand next to a stranger. "Drop your notebook when you pass his table," Reyes said. "Pages spread. It gives you the crouch, the gather, the excuse to be low and slow at his level for the duration." Ivy looked at the notebook. She looked at the device in her pocket. She thought about every restaurant she'd ever worked in, every room she'd ever learned to read by necessity, every man who'd ever looked through her because she was carrying something or wearing an apron. She thought about being invisible as a skill rather than a wound. "Okay," she said. Sable was a lunch restaurant that understood itself now. Dark wood, white tablecloths, the kind of quiet that cost money to maintain in a city that was fundamentally loud. The host stand was just inside the entrance, a young woman with the professional warmth of someone well-trained. Ivy walked in alone, Reyes and Adrian having dropped her at the corner with the understanding that two additional people entering the same restaurant within minutes of each other created pattern. "I had a reservation," Ivy said at the host stand. "Mercer, 1:15. My guest canceled." She let her voice carry just enough strain to explain the face, the slightly disarranged affect of a woman managing something personal in public. "I'd still like to sit if that's all right." The host looked at her with the professional compassion of someone whose job included managing people in the middle of difficult lunches. "Of course. Follow me." The table she was given was not ideal. Center section. Too much visibility. She looked at the floor plan with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 8 years understanding restaurant geometry. "I'm sorry. Would it be possible to sit somewhere a bit more?" She gestured vaguely. "I just need to not be in the middle of things today." She was moved to a table near the back left section. 2 tables from Brennan. She sat with her back 3/4 to him and ordered a glass of white wine. She sat on the table and did not touch, and opened the notebook and stared at it with the expression of someone composing a difficult message to someone who had caused them significant pain. She wrote nothing. The expression did all the work. She did not look at Brennan. She was aware of him in the peripheral way she was aware of every table in any room she worked. Not observation, absorption, the ambient accumulation of information through the pores rather than the eyes. 61, gray hair, sitting precisely as Reyes had described. Straight-backed. A man who had been sitting in rooms making decisions about what got overlooked and what got surfaced for enough years that the authority in his posture had become anatomical. His security was at the table northeast. Gray jacket. Ordering, she noted peripherally, soup. The time was 1:22, 7 minutes. She sat with the notebook and the untouched wine and let the room forget her. The particular skill of restaurant invisibility. She knew it the way she knew her own hands. The server came and she declined food, and the server moved on without lingering. The table to her left was a business lunch going well, two men laughing, expansive in their space. They did not look at her. Nobody looked at her. She was a woman at a table being sat in public, which was the most common invisible thing in any restaurant in any city. At 1:27, she picked up the notebook and stood. She smoothed the coat. She turned to walk toward the restrooms, which required passing Brennan's table. She measured her pace. Not slow, not quick. The pace of someone who knows where she's going and isn't thinking about the room. She passed Brennan's table. The notebook left her hand. It hit the floor at the edge of his table with the specific spread of a notebook whose pages are well used and not secured, fanning out across the hardwood, pages sliding, several reaching almost to his feet. She made a small sound, involuntary, the sound of mild social embarrassment, and crouched immediately. Gathering pages. The motion put her left side close to his chair. Her left hand was gathering pages. Her right hand, inside the coat pocket, had the device out and pressed against the left side of her coat at his seated shoulder height. She pressed the button on the left edge. 60 seconds. She gathered pages slowly, carefully, with the slightly flustered attention of someone managing an embarrassing situation. Brennan had glanced down at the spread of papers with the benign, mild irritation of someone whose space has been encroached upon by accident. His security had looked up. She did not look at the security. She focused on the pages. 40 seconds. Brennan made a small sound. Not quite a word. The sound of someone deciding whether to assist or simply wait for the inconvenience to resolve. She murmured an apology without looking up. Her right arm was steady. Her breathing was not precisely steady, but it was controlled, and she controlled it the way she controlled everything she needed to keep running in this moment, by telling herself she could fall apart later when it cost less. 20 seconds. Her left knee was on the hardwood, and it would bruise because the same knee had hit the restaurant floor 6 years ago during a kitchen accident, and the joint had never been quite right since, and she cataloged the pain as information and filed it. 10 seconds. She gathered the last page. She stood. The device went back into the inner pocket as she straightened and gathered the notebook against her chest with both hands, with the motion of someone resettling a dropped object. She offered the table a small apologetic smile that landed in the space between Brennan and the empty air beyond him. He had already looked away. She walked to the restroom. Inside, alone, she ran cold water over both wrists and looked at herself in the mirror for 3 full seconds. Her face was a disaster. The bruise had settled into full color now, greenish-purple along the cheekbone, the lips slightly swollen on the right side. She looked like someone who had been in a fight. She had been in a fight. She looked herself in the mirror, and the woman looking back at her was 24 years old and shaking in the specific fine tremor of adrenaline's recession, and she told that woman, later, and the woman agreed. She dried her hands. She checked the device. A single green light on the left edge, small as a pinpoint. She didn't know what that meant specifically, but she knew green meant something different from red. She walked back through the restaurant. She left $40 on the table next to the untouched wine, more than the glass cost. The automatic calculation of a person who had served tables and knew what it meant to tend a single-item table for 40 minutes. She walked out into the cold. Reyes's car was at the corner. She got in. Adrian turned from the front passenger seat and looked at her. She held up the device. The green light was still on. He took it from her hand. He looked at it. Something moved through his face. Not quite relief. Relief was too simple. Something more complicated, the expression of a man who has been running toward a specific thing for 3 years and has just touched it for the first time. Green means successful copy, Reyes said. She was already driving. We need to get it to Marcus in the next 2 hours before Brennan notices anything irregular and changes the device. Marcus can have it in 90 minutes, Adrian said. He was still holding the device. His thumb moved once across its surface. If the communication thread is intact, it'll be intact, Reyes said. The model copies everything. Marcus can decrypt the compression in 40 minutes. And then we have names. Every name, every payment, every federal contact who's been managing the investigation assignments for the past 2 years. Reyes paused. Enough to bring the protection structure down before Thursday. The car moved through Chicago traffic, through the ordinary machinery of a Thursday afternoon in February. Buses, cyclists, pedestrians with their heads down against the wind. Ivy sat in the back seat and pressed her coat against her body and let the adrenaline continue its recession and thought about what came next. What came next was the part she didn't know yet, because getting the data was one problem. What Luca did when he realized his protection structure was being disassembled in real time was a different problem. And Luca had called her phone, which meant Luca had her number, which meant Luca had decided she was a variable he needed to manage. And men who decided that about people tended to manage them decisively. Her phone buzzed. Same unknown number. She answered it. "You didn't take the car," Luca said. Still pleasant, still even. The pleasantness was slightly different now, though. Tighter, like something being held at a specific tension. "I'm going to assume that was Adrian's decision and not yours." "You'd be wrong," she said. A pause. When he spoke again, the pleasantness had adjusted by a small but significant degree. "I see. Then let me offer you a different framing of the situation, since apparently the uncomplicated version didn't resonate." He paused. "The Halcyon Hotel Gala is tonight, 8 p.m. It's a charity event, the kind that powerful men attend because it allows them to be publicly generous while conducting business privately. Several of my contacts will be there. Several of Adrian's former allies who have recently reconsidered their positions will also be there." Another pause. "And I will be there, with enough documentation of Adrian Moretti's operational activities over the past 3 years to hand to a federal prosecutor before midnight, unless something changes my mind between now and then." Ivy said nothing. "The documentation doesn't include you," Luca said. "You're peripheral, clean. You walk away from this and nothing I hand over tonight touches you, but Adrian," a slight shift in tone, "Adrian has built a very intricate structure over 18 years. It burns very thoroughly when it goes." "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you're the only person in that car who he'll listen to," Luca said. "And because the choice he makes in the next 4 hours is going to determine whether 14 people move through a pipeline on Thursday or whether Thursday gets canceled. And the only way Thursday gets canceled now is if Adrian stands down." He paused. "Tell him I said that. Tell him I am giving him one final arrangement. He steps back, I manage Thursday, and in exchange I burn the Gray Line operation myself afterward, and he walks away clean. Everyone survives." "You'd burn your own operation." "I'd burn a liability that has become too expensive to maintain. Gray Line was always a short-term asset." His voice was precise and entirely cold. "Tell him." The line went dead. She lowered the phone. She looked at Adrian's profile. He was watching the road ahead. "He's at the Halcyon Gala tonight," she said. 8 p.m. He says he has documentation of your operations for the past 3 years. He says he'll hand it to a federal prosecutor at midnight unless you stand down." She paused. "He says if you stand down, he burns Gray Line himself after Thursday." The car was quiet. Reyes said nothing. She drove. Adrian was quiet for a long time. His hand holding the data device was still. Outside, the city ran past the windows in its indifferent gray February way. "He won't burn it," Adrian said. "I know," Ivy said. "He built it for 11 years. He doesn't walk away from it." "I know." "Which means Thursday still happens unless someone stops it tonight." She met his eyes in the mirror. "At the gala." Reyes exhaled through her nose. "If we go to the Halcyon tonight, we're walking into the room he chose, on his timeline, with his contacts in every corner." "Yes," Adrian said. "He'll have eyes on every entrance. He'll know we're coming." "Yes." "He has documentation that burns you if this goes wrong." "He's had that for months," Adrian said quietly. "If he was going to use it without leverage, he would have used it already. He needs me present at the moment he hands it over. The federal contact requires direct identification. That's why he wants me standing down, not disappeared." He paused. "If I'm not in that room, the documentation is less valuable. He needs me there." "So by going, you're giving him what he wants," Reyes said. "By going, I'm the only one who can stop Thursday." He looked at Reyes. "Get Marcus the device. He has 90 minutes. Whatever he pulls from that communication thread, I need it formatted for a federal submission by 7:30. He paused. "I need Ivy out of this." "Adrian," Ivy started, "I need you out of the building before 8 p.m. He turned to look at her fully. and the expression on his face was the one she had no name for, the one that appeared briefly and was managed back under the controlled surface, but she'd seen it enough times now to know it was the true one, the one underneath everything else. "You've done everything I asked. You did it without hesitation, and you did it right, and I owe you—" He stopped. "I owe you more than I can currently pay, but I need you clear of this building before 8. "The streaming," she said suddenly. He looked at her. "The gala is a charity event. It's being live-streamed." She sat forward. Sable had a television in the bar. I saw it when I walked past. There was a banner for the Halcyon Gala charity broadcast. Live fundraising. They do it every year. She looked at him. "If Luca's contacts are in that room, and you have the data from Brennan's phone, and there is a live broadcast going out." She watched Adrian's face as it arrived. The things she was saying, what it meant structurally, logistically, in terms of what it would require and what it would expose and whether it was something she would survive. "Ivy," he said, "the broadcast system in a venue like the Halcyon is accessible through the AV booth," she said. "I know venue AV. I've worked catering events. The booth is always understaffed during cocktail hour." She held his gaze. "If the data from Brennan's phone is formatted for display, names, payment records, the federal contacts, and someone gets it into the broadcast system before midnight, the entire city watches," Reyes said quietly. "You can't prosecute a room full of people in real time," Ivy said, "but you can make it impossible for the story to disappear. You can make it the kind of thing that every outlet in this city is running by morning and no federal contact can bury." She paused. "Luca's protection structure only works in the dark." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "You just told me you'd be in that building," he said. "Yes. You just told me you'd be in that building with Luca, his contacts, and the documentation he's planning to hand over at midnight." I heard myself say it. "Ivy, I know." She held his gaze. "I know what I'm saying. I'm saying it anyway." She paused. "Tell me you have a way into the broadcast system." The car turned north. The river appeared briefly between buildings and then disappeared again. Adrian looked at her for 5 seconds, 7, 10. The longest she had been looked at with that specific quality of attention, like he was memorizing her because he was not certain this was not the last time. Then he said, "Reyes." "I know a tech," Reyes said immediately. She had apparently already been thinking about it. "She can prep a formatted package from Marcus's decrypt. 3 hours. Can she get someone into the Halcyon AV booth?" "She can't. But I know the lead technician for the venue's broadcast contractor. He owes me something significant." Reyes's voice was flat and professional and slightly grim. "He'll get someone in." "Someone," Adrian said. "Someone," Reyes confirmed. The car went quiet. Ivy understood what that meant. Someone meant her because the lead technician would clear one person and one person only, and it needed to be someone Luca's eyes in the venue hadn't cataloged, and it needed to be someone who understood how to move through a room without being the thing the room was watching. The Halcyon Hotel appeared ahead through the windshield, its facade lit against the early dark, the marquee announcing the gala in gold letters. Ivy looked at it. Her face hurt. Her knee hurt. She had not slept more than 3 hours and had not eaten since the granola bar 20 hours ago, and the adrenaline had been metabolizing her reserves with no replenishment. She looked at it anyway. At 7:40 p.m., wearing a dark dress that was Reyes and fit her within one size and covered the bruise on her arm, but not the one on her face, Ivy Mercer walked through the service entrance of the Halcyon Hotel with a USB drive in her coat pocket and the specific quality of calm that arrived. She had learned, not when the danger was over, but when, at 7:40 p.m., wearing a dark dress that was Reyes and fit her within one size and covered the bruise on her arm but not the one on her face. Ivy Mercer walked through the service entrance of the Halcyon Hotel with a USB drive in her coat pocket and the specific quality of calm that arrived not when the danger was over, but when the decision had been made and the body accepted that it was too late to unmake it. The service corridor smelled like industrial cleaner and hot catering trays. Long fluorescent hallway, white tile, the distant sound of an orchestra tuning somewhere above her. She moved through it the way she had moved through 1,000 back-of-house corridors. with the purposeful invisibility of someone who belonged there. Someone with a task and a destination and no time for questions. She was carrying a small black bag that contained nothing useful except a folded event program she'd taken from a stack near the entrance, which gave her something to hold and something to look at if anyone stopped her. Nobody stopped her. The AV booth was on the mezzanine level, accessed through a door that required a keycard that the broadcast technician, a compact man named Joel, who owed Reyes something she hadn't specified and who had communicated primarily through grim nods, had clipped to the inside of the bag without commentary. She used it at 7:52. The booth was small, warm, smelling of electronics and cold coffee. A woman in her early 30s was already there, Reyes's tech contact, introduced only as the person who had formatted the data package. She looked at Ivy's bruised face for exactly 1 second and then returned to her equipment. "Package is ready," she said. "It's formatted for the broadcast overlay. It'll display as a full-screen document feed on top of the charity stream. Names, payment records, the federal contacts, the Gray Line transit records. 12 pages." She paused. "Once you insert the drive and I initiate, it goes out to everyone watching the live stream. There's no recall." "How many people are watching?" Ivy said. "The gala stream has about 14,000 regular viewers. It's been running an hour already." She paused. "That number goes up when something interrupts the program." Ivy looked at the monitor showing the live feed. The Halcyon ballroom was visible. Chandeliers, white tablecloths, men in dark suits and women in formal wear. The particular choreography of a high-end charity event that was also, in the invisible layer beneath its surface, a business meeting conducted in formal clothes. She scanned the room. She found Luca in 40 seconds. He was not what she had imagined. She had built him in her mind from his voice, measured, cultured, the pleasantness as weapon, and she had imagined someone who looked like the voice. He didn't. He was 53, medium height, unremarkable in the way of a man who had spent decades perfecting unremarkability as protective coloration. Brown suit, thinning hair. He was standing near the bar talking to 2 men she didn't recognize, and he was smiling, and the smile was the voice made visible, warm, inclusive, the smile of a man who had learned to make people feel chosen. She looked for Adrian. He wasn't on the feed yet, which meant he was either in the room and outside the camera's range, or he hadn't arrived. The plan, assembled in 90 minutes in Reyes's car and built on provisional architecture and too many unknown variables, was for Adrian to enter through the main entrance at 8:15 with documentation from Marcus's decrypt, formatted for federal submission. The broadcast went at 8:45, timed to when the room would be at peak capacity and before Luca's midnight deadline gave him reason to move earlier. That was the plan. Plans were what you had until you were inside the room. At 8:06, her phone vibrated. "Adrian. Inside. Luca has 2 people on the east wall who aren't catering staff. Stay in the booth until 8:40. She typed back. "Understood." She stood in the booth and watched the feed and waited. Below, the gala moved through its social mechanics. Cocktail hour transitioning to dinner seating. The orchestra playing something unobtrusive. The charity auction items displayed on easels along the west wall, the kind of auction where the items were irrelevant and the act of bidding was the actual currency. A public display of resources. She watched Luca move through the room with the unhurried confidence of a man who believed the evening was already resolved. He stopped to speak to a gray-haired man near the east corridor. She recognized him from Reyes's briefing photographs, one of the city officials in the payment records. They spoke for approximately 40 seconds, and the gray-haired man nodded once and moved on. She watched Adrian enter the frame at 8:09, coming from the west side of the ballroom. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie, and he moved through the room in the way she had watched him move through Black Lantern Grill for 3 months, with the particular stillness of a man who created space around himself not through aggression, but through the specific gravity of someone whom rooms had learned to accommodate. He did not look at Luca. He took a position near the north wall, accepted a glass of something from a passing server, and stood. He looked up once toward the mezzanine. She was behind glass. He couldn't see her. She understood that he was looking in her direction anyway, because that was the kind of thing you did when the person you were thinking about was somewhere in the building and you needed to know the building contained them. At 8:22, Luca found him. She watched it on the feed. Luca crossing the room with the relaxed gait of a man arriving at a conversation he had been expecting. Adrian didn't move toward him or away. He stood and let Luca come to him, which she understood as its own language. They stood together near the north wall, and she couldn't hear them, and the camera was on a wide angle that showed them as two men at a party having a conversation, which was exactly what they looked like, and exactly what they were not. She could see their faces, barely. Luca still with the controlled warmth, Adrian with the expression she knew, the stillness that was not calm. She watched Adrian say something that made the warmth in Luca's face recalibrate by a small but visible degree. Luca responded. Adrian looked at him with the particular flatness she had seen in the kitchen that morning when he said 6 weeks. The look of a man who has been carrying a specific knowledge alone for a long time and has stopped pretending he hasn't. At 8:31, something changed. She saw it on the feed before she understood it. One of Luca's men on the east wall moved. Not toward Adrian, toward the stairwell that led to the mezzanine. She processed this in real time. Luca had eyes on the booth. Luca had known, or suspected, or been told. She looked at Reyes's tech. How long to initiate from now? 30 seconds once you insert the drive. Insert it. The tech looked at her. We're 14 minutes early. He's sending someone up here. Ivy put the drive in the tech's hand. Insert it. The tech inserted it. On the feed, Adrian had seen the same movement. She watched him put down his glass. She watched him look at Luca, and she watched something in that look that communicated clearly even through a monitor at distance. He knew what was happening. Luca was still smiling. Ready, the tech said. On my count, Ivy said. She watched the stairwell door on the secondary monitor, the security camera feed the tech had pulled up. The man from the east wall was in the corridor below, 60 seconds from the mezzanine door. She watched Adrian move away from the north wall, moving toward Luca's position, not away. She understood why. If Adrian was in physical proximity to Luca when the broadcast hit, Luca's first move would be toward the exit, and his second would be toward whoever he could use as leverage. And the only leverage in this building that had any value to Luca was the same leverage it had always been. She watched Adrian put himself between Luca and the south exit. Now, she said. The tech initiated. On the main feed monitor, the charity auction display dissolved. What replaced it was a document, clean white background, black text, the first page of Gerald Brennan's communication thread with Luca Severin's intermediary. Names, dates, payment amounts. The first federal contact listed was a name she recognized from Reyes's briefing, a name that would mean something to anyone who read Chicago news. Below, in the ballroom, she watched the room notice. It was not immediate. The change in the broadcast monitors positioned around the ballroom took approximately 4 seconds to register in the crowd's attention, and then another 3 seconds for the attention to consolidate into reaction. She watched heads turn. She watched people reach for phones. She watched a woman near the east wall pull up the live stream on her device and stare at it and then stare at the man standing nearest to her whose name was on the document. Luca looked up at the ballroom monitors. For the first time, the warmth left his face entirely. The mezzanine door opened. Ivy had already moved away from the equipment station, back against the side wall of the booth, out of the direct sight line from the door. The man who came through was one of Luca's. She recognized the quality of stillness from the east wall. He was larger than he'd appeared on the monitor, thick through the shoulders, and he saw the tech at the equipment station first, and then found Ivy in the second sweep. Step away from the equipment, he said to the tech. To Ivy. You need to come with me. The broadcast is already running, Ivy said. 14,000 people. Whatever you do in the next 30 seconds is also going to be documented. He looked at the monitor. The second page of the document was cycling. He looked at Ivy. His face was doing the calculation she could see clearly, the calculation of a man weighing his instructions against the changed parameters of the situation. Luca said, bring you down, he said. Luca is managing a room full of people currently reading his financial records, Ivy said. How much of his attention do you think is on what you do in the next 30 seconds? The calculation continued. She watched it. She had spent 8 years reading what people actually meant beneath what they said, and this man was not complicated. He was someone following instructions who had just lost confidence that the instructions reflected current reality. He left. She exhaled. The tech looked at her. Is the broadcast still running? Yes. Page 7 of 12. Then we're fine. Ivy looked at the feed. The ballroom below was in the specific chaos of a formal event that has lost its formality. People standing, moving, the orchestra having stopped, the social architecture of the evening dissolved. She found Adrian on the feed. He was still near the north wall, and Luca was no longer visible in his immediate vicinity. Luca was not visible anywhere on the feed. She grabbed the bag. Which exit gets me to the ballroom floor fastest? The tech pointed. She went. The east stairwell deposited her into a service corridor that connected to the ballroom through a catering door. She pushed through it and entered the room from the east side, and the room was loud in the way crowds went loud when something had happened. Not panic, not silence, but the elevated noise of 1,000 conversations suddenly finding the same subject matter. The broadcast was still running on the ballroom monitors, cycling through pages. She saw a man she recognized from the records standing very still near the west wall, phone at his ear, the particular stillness of someone whose night had just restructured entirely around a single fact. She found Adrian at the north wall. He was alone, which was wrong. She reached him and he turned and looked at her, and the look told her something immediately. "Where is he?" she said. "Upper level." Adrian's voice was even. His jaw was tight. "There's a glass observation lounge on the 4th floor. He went up 3 minutes ago." He paused. "He has a phone with federal contact information that can still initiate something damaging if he makes one call. The broadcast complicates it, but doesn't eliminate it. If he gets the right person on the line in the next 20 minutes, he can redirect the narrative." "Then why are you still down here?" "Because I was waiting for you to come out of that booth," he said. The flatness in his voice broke on the last word, just slightly, the fracture of a single syllable, and she heard it. "I'm out," she said. "Go." They went up. The 4th floor of the Halcyon was event overflow space, meeting rooms, a secondary bar, and at the end of the north corridor, a glass-walled observation lounge that projected over the building's facade with a view of the city in every direction. The corridor was empty. The sounds of the ballroom below were muffled and distant. Their footsteps on the carpet were the loudest thing. The lounge door was glass, and Luca was visible through it before they reached it, standing at the far wall of windows, phone at his ear, back to the door. The city glittered behind him in the February dark, the river and the towers and the grid of streets laid out like a circuit board. Adrian opened the door. Luca turned. He looked at Adrian. He looked at Ivy. He lowered the phone but did not end the call. "I should have moved faster," he said. To Adrian, not to her. "That's the honest analysis. I gave you too much time because I assumed the girl would be the variable that slowed you down." He paused. "I was wrong about that." "End the call," Adrian said. "Already did." Luca showed the screen. Ended, 30 seconds ago. "The contact won't pick up now. They're watching the same broadcast everyone else is watching, and they're currently calculating their own exposure." He pocketed the phone. "You've made it very difficult for anyone to help me tonight." "That was the point," Adrian said. Luca looked at him for a long moment. Outside the glass, the city was enormous and indifferent and lit from within like something alive. 11 years, he said. 11 years I ran this organization's operational infrastructure. Every route, every contact, every arrangement that kept us functional while you built the mythology. His voice was still even. Still the voice from the phone, the controlled instrument. But underneath it now she could hear something that hadn't been there before. Not emotion exactly, more like the sound of something that had been compressed for a long time releasing in a controlled manner. You got the credit. You got the fear and the loyalty and the name that made rooms go quiet. I got the ledgers. You chose that, Adrian said. I chose to be useful. Something moved in Luca's face. I chose to believe that useful meant something, that eventually it translated into... He stopped. It doesn't matter. No, Adrian said. It doesn't. The two men looked at each other in the glass room above the city, and Ivy stood to the side and felt the specific weight of the moment. Not dramatic in the cinematic sense, but heavy in the actual sense. The way things were heavy when they had been a long time arriving and were finally here. 11 years of proximity and management and the accumulating resentment of a man who had decided that power deferred was power eventually received, and the moment when the deferral had run out. "Gray line," Adrian said. "The Thursday shipment." Luca's expression didn't change. "What about it?" "Call it off." "I don't have that reach anymore, you know that." "You built it. You have the operator contacts." "The operators are going to be reading their names on a charity live stream in approximately..." Luca checked his watch. 8 minutes. They're already in motion. "Then you call them, and you tell them to stand down before they do something that adds to their exposure." Adrian's voice was flat and precise. "Or I hand everything Marcus pulled from Brennan's phone directly to the federal field office tonight, including your communications with the operators, and the Thursday shipment becomes a federal interdiction instead of a cancellation." "Federal interdiction means arrests," Luca said. "The operators will burn everyone they can reach before they let that happen, including people who aren't involved." "Then call them." Silence. Luca looked at Adrian. He looked at Ivy. She met his eyes and held them and didn't look away, because she had been looked at by men who held power over situations she was inside of for her entire adult life, and she had learned that looking away was the thing that confirmed their assessment of the size of the space you occupied. He looked back at Adrian. "And then what? I make the call. Thursday is canceled. The network is exposed. What happens to me?" "That's not my decision anymore," Adrian said. "The broadcast made it someone else's decision." Luca was quiet for several seconds. She watched him process that, the specific finality of it, the understanding that the moment the data went out over 14,000 screens, the situation had moved outside the bilateral negotiation he'd been managing and into something larger, something that didn't have an off switch. He had been operating in the dark for 11 years. The dark was gone. "Make the call," Adrian said. Luca made the call. It lasted 4 minutes. His voice during it was the controlled instrument she recognized, giving instructions with the precision of someone who had managed operations at this level for long enough that even at the end he did it well. When he ended it, he stood for a moment looking at the phone in his hand like it was an object he no longer recognized. Then he sat down in one of the lounge chairs. Just sat down, the way a man sat when he'd stopped going somewhere. Adrian looked at Ivy. She looked at him. Downstairs, distantly, she could hear the changed quality of the ballroom. Voices, movement, what sounded like an official announcement beginning over a microphone. The evening finding its new shape. Adrian took out his phone. He made a call of his own. He gave an address and a floor and a room number and said the name Luca Severin and said he's here and he's cooperative and ended the call. He stood for a moment looking at the city through the glass. Then he turned to Ivy. She looked at him. He looked at her. His face, in the low, warm light of the observation lounge with the city behind him and the night around them, was the face she had been seeing on Thursday evenings for 3 months, the still one, the controlled one. Except the control was different now. Not maintained against threat, maintained against something else. Something she recognized because she had been maintaining the same kind of control for most of the evening. "You need to go," he said, "before the federal people arrive. Your name is not in any of the documents. There is no record that connects you to tonight, and I need it to stay that way. Adrian, I am going to be in this building for a long time tonight," he said, "answering questions that I have the answers to, and offering arrangements that I have been building toward for 3 years, and doing the thing that I should have done before it required all of this." He paused. "I worked an immunity arrangement with federal contacts 6 weeks ago, before I knew about Luca, before any of this." He held her gaze. "I was already going to do it. I want you to know that. It wasn't tonight that decided it." She looked at him. "There are things I've done that don't get undone," he said. "People I've hurt, systems I've run, choices I made when I was 17 and when I was 26 and every year since. The immunity arrangement covers the victims I can protect and the operations I can expose. It doesn't cover everything." He paused. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel anything in particular. I'm telling you because you asked me who I was on a night when you didn't have to, and I told you the truth, and you deserve to have the rest of it." Ivy stood in the glass room and the city was behind him, and her face hurt and she had not eaten in 24 hours, and the woman who had called a number from a locker room floor on a February night felt very far away from her and also very close. "How long?" she said. "The immunity arrangement. How long before—" "I don't know exactly. Long enough." He looked at her steadily. "Long enough that you should go live your life." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what it meant to say that to someone, go live your life, and to mean it as an act of care rather than dismissal. She thought about her father, about the people in the Gray Line pipeline who would not move through it on Thursday, about a 22-year-old woman named Carla who had moved through a system like it 11 years ago and whose brother had built an empire out of the failure of arriving too late. She thought about what got repaired and what didn't. "Okay," she said. He nodded once. She left the lounge. She walked the empty corridor and took the east stairwell down and came out through the service door into the February night. And the cold hit her face and her bruised cheekbone registered it, and she let it register because she was done managing her responses for the evening. Reyes was at the end of the block, standing outside the car, not in it, standing, coat collar up, watching the Halcyon service exit with the attention of someone who had been waiting and had decided waiting meant being visible. When she saw Ivy, she didn't move toward her, just watched her walk the length of the block. Ivy reached her. Reyes looked at her face. "How bad?" "It's fine." "How bad?" Reyes said again. "He stayed up there," Ivy said. "He made Luca call off Thursday. He's waiting for federal." She paused. "He told me to go." Reyes was quiet. Then, "Get in the car." They drove without destination for a while, which Ivy understood as Reyes's version of giving her space to be somewhere without having to be somewhere specific. The city moved past the windows. February Chicago, indifferent and huge, doing its ordinary night things. "Where do you want to go?" Reyes said eventually. "My apartment." She paused. "I need to get my own clothes." Reyes drove her there. It was a third-floor walk-up in Wicker Park, the kind of apartment that was drafty in winter and too hot in summer, and had one good window over the fire escape that caught the morning light in a way that made it feel, on certain mornings, like a reasonable place to be. She went up alone and changed out of Reyes's dress and sat on the edge of her bed in her own clothes for a few minutes. Then she went to the kitchen and made toast because it was the only thing she had that didn't require preparation, and she ate it standing at the counter and looked at the kitchen window and the February dark outside it and thought about what came next. What came next was a question she didn't try to answer that night. The next 16 months were not a clean line. She wanted to say that afterward and make it true, that she took the experience and built directly from it, that the rubble sorted itself into something architectural. It wasn't like that. It was like most things, which meant it was incremental and uneven and involved weeks where nothing seemed to be building toward anything, and other weeks where she could feel, beneath the ordinary surface of days, something consolidating. She left waitressing. Not immediately, not dramatically. She worked 2 more months at a restaurant in Andersonville that was clean and reasonably managed and paid honestly, and during those 2 months she took a food service management course that she'd been putting off for 2 years. Then a business certification. Then she found a space. It was a small storefront on the Riverwalk, available because the previous tenant had left without notice. Narrow and in need of significant work, with a back wall of windows that looked out at the water in a way that the realtor seemed to think was a liability. And Ivy knew was the only reason she was going to lease it. She called it 1130. She did not explain the name to anyone who asked. She let people assume what they assumed. The cafe opened on a Thursday in April, 14 months after the night at the Halcyon. It was not a grand opening. She had neither the budget for spectacle nor the temperament for it. She unlocked the door at 7 a.m., and the first customer was a woman with a stroller who ordered a latte and sat by the river window for an hour. And Ivy made the coffee and stood behind the counter in her own place doing her own work and felt something she recognized, after a moment's processing, as the specific weight of a life that fit. The Gray Line network had collapsed in the week following the gala. Federal agents had moved on properties across the city by dawn, coordinating with the information structured from Brennan's communication records. All 6 restaurant waypoints were closed within 72 hours. Gerald Brennan had been arrested at his home Thursday morning, still in pajamas, which was the detail that made it into the newspapers and stayed there. Luca Severin had been taken from the Halcyon Observation Lounge that same night and had spent the subsequent months in cooperation arrangements that the newspapers covered with the breathless irregularity of a story with too many layers to maintain consistent attention. The 14 people scheduled for the Thursday shipment were found at a staging facility in Gary, Indiana, on Wednesday afternoon, 6 hours before the shipment was to have moved. They were alive. They were in conditions that she read about in a news article and put down after the third paragraph because the third paragraph was as far as she could go before the information became something her body received rather than her mind. She read that article on the fire escape with her coffee on a morning in March, and she sat with it, and then she folded the newspaper and went inside. Adrian Moretti's immunity arrangement was completed in month 4 of the federal process. It was not clean. The agreement covered specific operations and specific victims and required him to provide testimony that had significant personal cost in the networks it severed. The newspapers called it a deal. People who understood what the deal required called it something else. He received a sentence of 18 months for charges that weren't covered by the immunity terms. Charges that he had apparently offered to plead to without negotiation, which was a detail she'd learned from a brief she wasn't supposed to have seen, and which told her something she filed without opening into language. He served 14 of the 18 months. She didn't contact him. He didn't contact her. She thought about this sometimes and decided it was right. Not easy, not without its own kind of weight, but right in the way that things were right when they were honest about what they were. The cafe became what she'd known it could be, slowly and through work. She hired 2 people in month 3. Deja, who had been carrying Ivy's emergencies for years and had a genuinely extraordinary palate for coffee, and a young man named Calvin, who had been working the same kind of restaurant she'd come from and who she recognized the quality of immediately. She paid them honestly. She managed the till herself. On a Thursday in October, 16 months after the gala, it snowed. It was early for snow, and the city was not ready for it, which meant it was the wet, heavy kind that stuck to everything and turned the river walk into something that looked briefly beautiful and would be gray slush by noon. Ivy was behind the counter at 11:15 when it started, watching it through the river windows with the particular appreciation of someone who had good heat and a warm building and could afford to find snow beautiful again. The cafe had 3 customers at 11:30, a man with a laptop near the east window, a pair of women sharing something that required considerable discussion, and a woman reading at the counter who had been there since 9. At 11:47, the door opened. She knew it before she looked up. Not because of anything she could have pointed to, not a sound, not a shape. Something more ambient than that. The specific change in the room's quality that she had first felt on a Thursday night in February in a different place. He was wearing a dark coat, simple, no particular distinction. No car outside. No men at the periphery. He stood in the doorway for a moment in the snow-cold air, wet on his shoulders, and she looked at him across the counter of a place that was hers, and he looked back at her across the same distance. He looked different. She had been preparing for that, in the abstract way you prepared for things you knew were coming, and the preparation had not fully accounted for the actual fact of it. Prison and trials and 14 months of structured consequence had stripped something from him. Not the stillness, which remained, but the particular quality of armor that the stillness had been maintaining. What was left looked like a man. Specifically, and only that. The myth that the newspapers had called the Ghost King had apparently not survived the process of being handled by institutions that treated all men the same, regardless of what rooms had once gone quiet for them. She thought he looked more like himself than she had ever seen him. He came to the counter. He sat on one of the stools. There were 4 stools along the counter, something she'd added in month 2 because she liked the idea of a space where people could sit at the source of the thing rather than carried away from it. She poured coffee. Black. The same order from the same muscle memory, and she put it on the counter in front of him without asking. He looked at it. He looked at her. His face was doing the thing it did, not the controlled version, the one underneath, the one she'd seen in moments when the control wore through. She looked back at him the same way, without managing it, because she was in her own place, and the evening that had required everything she had to manage was a long time ago, and she was done performing equilibrium she didn't feel. You look... He stopped, started again. You look well. You look like you slept, she said. More than I had in years. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. His hands were the same. She noticed that. The place is good, he said, looking around without making a production of it, the way he looked at rooms. It's yours. It's mine. He nodded. He drank the coffee. Outside, the snow continued its early and slightly excessive arrival, covering the Riverwalk in a layer of white that made the city look briefly like a different city, cleaner and quieter than the one it would be by afternoon. I didn't know if you'd still be here, he said. In Chicago. Where would I go? Anywhere. You could have gone anywhere. I know. She looked at him. I stayed. He was quiet with that for a moment. She let him be quiet with it. The cafe made its cafe sounds. The coffee equipment, the low music she'd chosen for the morning, the snow against the windows. I don't know what I'm asking, he said finally. I want to be honest about that. I don't know what I have to offer that isn't... He paused. That isn't what I was. I know what you were, she said. I knew it that morning in the kitchen, and I stayed then too. That was different. It was the same, she said. It was exactly the same choice. He looked at her. Outside, a figure walked past the river window in the snow, bundled entirely, anonymous, one of 10,000 people moving through the city's Thursday morning on their way to wherever Thursday took them. The city went on being what it was, enormous and particular and indifferent to the specific weight of any single moment within it, which was what made the specific weight of any single moment within it mean something. I have $17 in a checking account, he said, and an apartment in Logan Square that smells like the previous tenant. He paused. That's an accurate inventory. I know, she said. I'm telling you because you deserve accurate inventories. I know that too. She put her hands on the counter. You want to know what I have? He waited. I have a cafe that's 11 months from breaking even, she said. I have 2 employees I'm responsible for, and a lease I will be paying until I am 41 years old. I have a knee that bothers me in cold weather, and a phone with a cracked screen that I keep meaning to replace. She paused. And I have a stool at my counter and coffee I made myself, and you're sitting in one and drinking the other, and that is what I have to offer, and I'm offering it. He held her gaze. Okay, he said. Outside, the snow fell over the river and the city and the Riverwalk and the 17,000 ordinary Thursday mornings happening simultaneously in this place that had nearly destroyed them both and had not, in the end, managed it. The cafe was warm. The coffee was good. 2 people who had found each other in the worst geography of each other's lives sat on opposite sides of a counter in a place that was small and honest and real, and neither of them was alone. And neither of them tried to make more of it than it was, which was enough. It was, in the end, enough.